So I'm back, and Free Guy's out, and I got to see it in theaters, which was pretty cool. Last time I went to theaters, I saw a kind of fun, okay movie, and Free Guy was a very fun, pretty good movie. So it was better. Yeah, it was pretty good. It was a lot better than Cruella. A lot better than I was expecting, for sure. I remember seeing the trailer for this movie like a year ago and being pretty intrigued. The concept of a whole NPC character hasn't really been done before, but didn't really have very high expectations. I still didn't up until release. I just kind of went to see it because I knew it'd be something fun to see with my brothers. And it was. I mean, it was a really good time. And looking at it from a whole film critical thinking point of view, it was not too shabby. Most of the jokes landed really well. Ryan Reynolds plays an innocent, funny character really well. But there was something about this film that was interesting. Even coming out of the theaters, I couldn't decide if it was a good or a bad thing, if it was done well or poorly. That thing is that this is a game. I hate that word. I guess it's not really a gamer movie. I mean, it's obviously made to appeal to as wide of an audience as possible. I mean, it's a big blockbuster film, but it's still a movie about video games, which is kind of weird to see. I mean, you see a lot of adaptation and stuff, but that's a whole different story. But you never really see a movie centered around a video game like Free Guy is. So I was pretty skeptical going into this film because Hollywood can be so out of touch with something sometimes. But like with the rest of the aspects of this film, I was pleasantly surprised. The whole video game thing was done pretty well most of the time. See, like I said, Hollywood can be so out of touch with some cultures sometimes, especially ones that involve our younger generation, like social media trends, and the same goes with video game culture. But it's inevitable that gaming will make more and more of a presence in the stories we see on the big screen, because it's the biggest entertainment industry on the planet. But there's more to making a video game movie than just making a movie about a video game. There's really three different aspects of this concept that this movie has to deal with. First, there's obviously the actual game part. The movie has to create a believable game within this universe that isn't cheesy or unrealistic. It has to seem like a game that would actually exist and that people would actually play. Second, there's the technology part. Not all movies related to video games have to involve this, but in the case of Free Guy, it does. The film has to navigate the complex world of programming and game development in a realistic way without blowing it out of proportion or just using lazy technobabble to make it seem more complicated than it is. And thirdly, there's the culture or trends part of it. And the question of whether or not this has to be done in the movie is debatable, but the studio certainly seem to believe that the movie has to imitate and engage in the culture and trends of video games. Each of these three tasks vary in difficulty, but Free Guy, just being the movie that it is, has to confront all of these challenges. And it is so close to doing so good at all of them. So let's start with number one, the actual game part. Just from the trailer, you can tell the concept of the video game is very important to this movie. And luckily, the movie does a pretty good job at it. I mean, it had to, or else it'd crumble pretty quickly. And how the movie does this is through some softish world building techniques. It never dives too deep into the mechanics and details of the video game, we are just given enough to work with. We can gather some general facts. It's an open world game where players level up through missions to buy cosmetics, skins, weapons, etc. These things are all presented pretty well too. The UI looks good, all the characters are dressed in pretty accurate cosmetics, and you can definitely tell they put a lot of work into making this video game feel like a video game. There are also many times the film didn't over-explain a common video game concept to us, which was great. Things like these guys being mods in the video game and being able to manipulate the game in ways regular players can't, or when it is discussed how Guy is an NPC, or when the characters keep asking Guy to take off his NPC skin, are just a few examples of things that regular people who do not game wouldn't quite get or understand, but the film just lets the audience catch on instead of spoon-feeding an explanation to them. But then there are plenty of other times when they just whip out that big spoon and just shove an explanation down your throat. This is inevitable in a big Hollywood film because it tries to appeal to as wide of an audience as possible, which leads to them resorting to quicker, lazier ways to get across a point. Stuff like this can even be seen in many emotional scenes. So overall, the actual game of this movie is very believable and well done, and I think the film did better at presenting the concept of the video game than any other movies have. It's not all the way there, but it's just about. Now onto the technology aspect of the film. And really quickly, from this point on, I will have to get into some spoilers. So, tech representation in film is something I've wanted to talk about for a while. The majority of films that handle tech notoriously misrepresent it. I'm sure you're familiar with someone yelling, "Enhance!" or "Crack the mainframe!" or "Get through the firewall!" This just isn't realistic. It's heavily stylized, very exaggerated, and a lot of the time just simply isn't how things work. Even my precious social network is somewhat guilty of this.
Let the hacking begin.
The coding scene is still very grounded, and none of the dialogue is nonsense or technobabble, but it is heightened and overcomplicated in order to dramatize the scene. It's just so ingrained in movies that coding looks like this or this or this that it wouldn't be fair to ask any different of Free Guy. So yeah, lots of the programming and game development in this movie is done on weird, futuristic looking programs. But while this film misrepresents technology, it actually does an alright job at representing game development. I was surprised to find out that the main conflict of this film comes from a dispute between an indie game dev's AI engine being stolen by a big game studio. That's surprisingly grounded and realistic. The tech boss's demands of shutting down the servers, banning players, and plenty of other realistic tech lingo were also fairly grounded and realistic. It all made sense and was something that could actually happen. They could have just thrown in a bunch of lines of gibberish that vaguely sounds video game related and just have the audience understand, oh, he's handling the problem with some very fancy programming pizzazz. But they didn't. It's not always presented perfectly. There are sometimes they have to explain some more complicated concepts through clunky dialogue and what have you, but the film still takes more steps in the direction of realistic and satisfying game-related storytelling than I've seen any other movie take. And lastly, we have video game culture and trends. Honestly, I don't like talking about this one as much as the other two. While the others were done fairly well, but not perfectly, this one was done generally not well. The only good thing I saw with this representation was how the film presented YouTube and streaming culture. The scene when Channing Tatum, which I had no idea was in this by the way, turns out to be controlled by a streamer was hilarious. I like how the game's character is all enthusiastic, but then the streamer is all mundane and dull like he's going on his 5th hour of streaming. That scene was also edited very well by the way. Also, one part that surprised me in the film is when they first showed actual YouTubers recording in their actual studios on the actual YouTube website. That's pretty cool. YouTube is a huge part of video game culture, and this was a pretty good way to just acknowledge that. And then they did it 5 more times. Yet they just completely overused this little gag. And each time the YouTubers got a little worse at acting, the videos got a little more forced, and their reactions just got more natural. And that kind of sucked. It was cool for a moment, but they just sort of overused it and ruined it. And unfortunately, that's the only real good part I had to talk about. Oh, also, every once in a while you'd see someone in the background teabagging or walking into a wall or start glitching out or something, and that was not only pretty funny, but also a great way of representing how people actually behave in video games. And then there's the bad. There weren't too many bad things in this film, but they were there. I can't believe I have to say it, but this isn't cool anymore, and it hasn't been for a long time. No one plays that anymore. No one does that. It's over. No one does that. It's done. We're done with that. Stop it. Remember what I said earlier about Hollywood being out of touch with the younger generations? Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. One reason this is such a problem is that movies take forever in pre-production, at least a year to film, and then another year post-production before release. The problem with this is that trends constantly change. Even the longest running memes or fads only last a few months at the most. You can mention a meme from 2 weeks ago and suddenly it's not cool anymore. So the guys in Hollywood to try to ride these trends when they are not only already out of touch because they are 40-year-old men, and the movie won't come out for years after the trend has died, it's a terrible idea. Stop. Just stop it. Okay. In reality, though, this was literally like 2 or 3 times that Fortnite was brought up, and yeah, it was plenty cringy, but it could have been way more. Like, seriously, we're insanely lucky that this wasn't brought up dozens of times in a video game blockbuster. Anyways, that's about it. It's pretty similar to the other two elements of video games that I talked about. It has its good and bad parts. The actual game part of the film was presented in a cool and realistic way, but not all the time. The game development aspect was way more realistic, grounded, and complex than I expected it to be, but it also had to be spoon-fed sometimes because of that. And the incorporated trends were sometimes cool and in touch, but a few times they were very out of touch. But when it comes down to it, I think in all these categories there were usually much more hits than misses. There were plenty of other areas I didn't even talk about, but overall this movie was a very fun, wholesome time, and there's really no need to nitpick each and every problem with it. I just wanted to use this movie as an opportunity to talk about some of the things that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. So, yeah, that's it. Have a good day. Thanks for watching.